probably they have maybe 10 or 5 or 10 with these islands, and what they are, they're unsinkable aircraft carriers. That's what they are.
Yeah.
They got an airfield, and they're unsinkable because the Chinese are only interested in the well-being of the South China Sea, because that is their livelihood. The shipping lanes that the South China Sea. And so what we would do is, if we were at war, and they know this strategically, that the Straits of Malacca would be cut off to the Chinese. Singapore is an ally of the United States, so that would be a problem. So the Chinese don't want any war. What they want to do is make products and use their industry to bring the people up economically in the world, the way they did. And this is an awesome statistic. China, in 3 decades, has raised 500 million people from poverty to middle class. Now, there's never been an experience like that anywhere else in civilization. And so you begin to wonder, are they such bad? They're interested in enriching the quality of life of their people. What's wrong with that? If it's an autocratic system, I got to tell you, you don't want me to describe the autocratic nature of the American system. So no, we can put that away. But I hearken back to, if you want to know what's going on, take an overview, because the mainstream they're lying to you. What we need is a bias. What we need to do is to be able to look at the overview. And again, who's spending the money on weapons and who's spending the money on economic development. That's what tells the story.
Thank you. Another question was, what are your thoughts on the protests in Hong Kong?
It's a mixed bag. One, I'm for it, and another reason I'm against it. The reason why I'm for it is because it advances in some way democracy. Now, democracy is very imperfect in the world, and that's the reason why I'm against it in many respects, because you assume that the right to vote is democracy. That's not democracy, because the right to vote now is oppressed in the United States, and it would be oppressed over there even if they had a democracy. The democracies don't work in the world today. What you can vote, well, so what? You vote. Why is it that the tyrants get back in office so easily when people have the right to vote? So selling democracy that you're going to have the right to vote. No, I come at it from a very personal way. I believe that the people should have the right to make laws in partnership with the monopoly held by representative government. Because the people are not stupid. They can sense what's going on. And so whenever I see a protest, like the one I see in Hong Kong or in the United States, it's just an admission that democracy doesn't work. Or the type of democracy doesn't work, because people have to protest. The only time it works is for the second when you go into a polling booth and you throw a switch. Right when you do that, you got power. After you've done that, then you got to beg, borrow, and whatever, suck up to the people that got elected, and you don't get another chance to exercise your power for 2, 4, 6 years. That's my take on it. So I'm glad in a sense they're protesting, because, but if they go to extremes, then all of that will cause oppression, and that's not the solution. If you're going to protest, and then just be very, very careful how you do it. But Xi Jinping doesn't want to send troops into Hong Kong, but they're trying to box him in. It's a little bit Tiananmen Square. Most Americans think that thousands of people were killed in Tiananmen Square. The record indicates, by objective analysis, several hundred. And Tiananmen Square, most people, this were students. And I remember so vividly when the premier came down to talk to the students and offer them compromises. Oh, God, there's my dog.
Little Ginger.
Ginger. Well, what happened in Tiananmen Square, most people forget that 10 years before that, you had the Cultural Revolution, where several million people were killed, and they were trying to bring back China to the Stone Age by taking university professors and making them work on farms. So now you take Chen Xiaoping, who was abused, physically abused, and a relative killed in the Cultural Revolution, and now he's the head of China, and you got these kids that are protesting, and this one scene that I recall so well, when the premier was caving into a bunch of issues, and this sophomoric young man said, "That's not enough. They want to run the country." Well, the adult Chinese at that time had an experience of the sophomores running the country, and that was the Cultural Revolution. And so the leadership, anybody in leadership knows that if you got to take recourse to violence, fine. If you're in an apartheid country and you use violence, I can understand that. But if you're in a place like Hong Kong, where it's culturally and economically superior to most places on earth, then you got to be careful how you're handling yourself. And there's no question that that law that they were proposing to be able to take people back to China for prosecution, I agree that law should be. And so once that protest was done and succeeded, now what are the protests doing now? I have a hard time understanding how they want to separate totally from China when China is on a rise. And eventually China will have to reconcile itself to a more democratic form of government. What will it be? I don't know. I do know that when we get to a point that when the people are making laws, this will go around the world like wildfire. And so I've got a book coming out. I hope you buy it.
Yeah.
And the book is The Failure of Representative Government. And so that's all we have. In the world, we have the tyrants and we have representative government. And the representative government is not working well. That's the only take I have. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't really work hard to elect good people to public office, because we've got so many people in office that are just empty shirts.
Yeah. Well, why did you first get into politics? Why did you leave behind private business?
I was 15 years old. I was working as a soda jerk, and I'm dyslexic, so I don't read very well, and so I had problems in school. But I was charming enough that the nuns in the 8th grade gave me a medal for being the most charming guy. So I couldn't read very well, but so I was working as a soda jerk, and a local politician from Boston, I was in Massachusetts, came in and asked if I would help pass out brochures. And so he left me a stack. And I took my task. I was a serious person as a young person, as an adult. And so I passed out these things very assiduously. Now, a lot of people take these, the guy's gone, throw it in a sewer, and that's the end of the story. And so, no, this guy comes back a month later, and he had a sense of what was going on in the constituency, and I had passed out every bit of literature he gave me. So when he turned around, he said, "Would you help me some more?" And I said, "Yes." So he turned around and put $10 on the counter to pay me for my time. And here I'm 15 years old. 10 years well, that'd be 45. That's a lot of money. But what got me more than the money was the recognition. Man, I was important if I had a state representative come in and ask me to help him. And so what happened after that, I worked in everybody's campaign that were what I would call liberal progressives. I didn't work with the Republicans. And so from 15, when I was in the service, I worked in politics in Europe. When I was in New York going to Columbia, I was working in Tammany Hall to get the feeling of that. And so I've always been a political animal in that regard. And there was always a hope in the future that I would be able to run for office. And so I did run for office, and I was very progressive. And so and it's an interesting situation. I got to Alaska, I was dead broke. And 12 years later, I'm sitting in the United States Senate. And all I can say is work hard and be lucky. You have to be lucky. But a lot of times by working hard, you make the luck. And so work hard and be lucky. Rebecca, that's my wisdom to you.
Thank you.
And your friends who are listening,
Yeah.
if they'll work their hearts out to get you elected, I think it would be a very positive thing for the country.
Thank you.
And then I'll be working to get direct democracy. And
Yeah.
you can once you're in office, you can endorse my plan.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you were first getting started in politics and first running for office, were there political figures, for either contemporary from history, that you look up to, or they were role models?
The person I look up to politically the most is Hubert Humphrey. And here again, you could pick up a few things that you can say negative about Hubert Humphrey. But it's like Tulsi Gabbard. You have to look at the totality of the person and what they've done and what they're doing. And with Hubert Humphrey, I got to tell you, when he came back into the Senate, I didn't know him very well until he ran for president. But in the Senate, I worked very closely with him. I was a maverick. I was outspoken. And so we would conspire on things. And I would raise all kinds of hell. And then he would make sure it got through. And that's where I came to admire him as a realist. And that's one of the things I was saying with respect to Tulsi and Bernie and Warren, is that you got to be realist. Here, Warren turned around and supported Hillary. Bernie was her neighbor. She knew Bernie. She knew his record. But why did she support Hillary, who was a flawed candidate? And her response to that is a legitimate response. She wanted to have influence. Okay, I can understand that. Mm-hmm. But by the same token, it's taking the measure of the person. Tulsi resigned from a position with the DNC and endorsed Bernie. Now, make a comparison. Has Tulsi got such a bad record when you begin to look at it from a certain realistic perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What of all the progressive policies that are being talked about right now, which one do you like the most, or are you most excited about?
Well, it's not. The problem is it's not being talked about. It's the whole nuclear policy. You'll see in my book here, we would not be alive today if it weren't for a person by the name of Vasily Arkhipov, a Russian naval officer who was able to. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Crimson Tide. Mm-hmm. Well, that was a takeoff on the actual event of Vasily Arkhipov, where he was able to browbeat the submarine commanders and their staff into not unleashing a nuclear torpedo. That after Kennedy and Khrushchev had made their deal, that this torpedo would have annihilated the flotilla that was surrounding Cuba. And that would have meant that Kennedy would have had to respond, and Khrushchev. And so we would have the world would have been incinerated back then. I was 32 years old at the time, and my life was in their hands. And the guy that did it was Vasily Arkhipov. You can look him up on WikiLeaks, and you'll see the whole history of him.
Wow.
Vasily Arkhipov.
Look him up, guys. Vasily Arkhipov.
Yeah, the reason why, it hits me at home. I would not have been alive if it hadn't been, because we have several accidents. And so what we've got to do is, as I was pointing out earlier, we're spending trillions of dollars on improving our nuclear capability when it's insanity. The other issue that I'm totally concerned about is we could destroy the planet by accident with our nuclear capability. We are destroying the planet not by accident, but by force of will, with the
The oil companies?
No, the nuclear, not nuclear, excuse me for the senior moment, the climate change. That's the two major areas that are destroying the planet is nuclear and climate change. One is going to take longer, but once we begin to feel the pinch of resources that are not available to people, people get violent. I can recall when we had the gas problem in the late 70s. There are people that killed other people at the gas station so they could get their gas.
Wow.
Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Now, imagine when you don't have enough water, where you're losing erosion. It'll be a cruel death, and of course, it'll be a cruel death with nuclear because what will happen is we'll eclipse the sun for decades, and so we'll die a cruel, terrible death. So, and these policies are being dealt with right now with our leadership. You wonder, what the hell is their thinking that when you hear a general like Mattis, who's made statements which are terrible, and he was the adult in the room with Trump. So give
Scary thought, yeah.
Oh, very, very. And it's these military leaders. We got more generals and admirals right now than we had during the Second World War when we had 13 million people in their arms. So it's the military-industrial complex. Why do we have to make all these weapons? I'll give you an interesting one. Trump went to a factory, and I think it was in Ohio. It was where they make tanks. Okay, now, and so what is the manufacturing? We're making tanks. We got 6,000 tanks, and they're still making more.
I know.
It would be more economically if they just made cars and gave them away.
Right.
6,000 tanks. Where are we going to get into a land war when we've just created a command, space command?
Yeah, what do you think about the Space Force?
It's suicidal. Here, we got a plan. We've been working on here. They now made it a military command, but we've been working on this for many, many years. In fact, I just want to say, whenever you hear about China and Russia doing all these things, we've been doing them before they did. Remember when, 10 years ago, we were listening to Angela Merkel's phone calls?
Yeah.
Now, you're telling me that the Chinese are bad or the Russians are bad? I mean, what about ourselves?
Right.
So I forget the point I was. The Space Command. What we learned, and this is a decade old. What we learned is if you had any explosion in space, what's going to happen to the satellites? They'll get all off course. We'll go blind. We're all technologically dependent upon satellites in space. And so now when you start talking about, well, they're doing bad things in space, but we don't do bad things. Hell, we've been doing bad things in space. And so when somebody says, well, we have to have a military presence so we can fight in space, there's no fighting in space. We're going to blind everybody. That's essentially what's going to happen. And we're all going to lose our jobs because there's no electricity. This is what our planners and our leaders do as a matter of course.
Yeah.
And don't doubt it for a minute that the budget, the defense budget, they pack everything in there, and if you don't vote for it as a member of the Senate or the House, you're unpatriotic. You're doing away with our defense. And I hope that when you get there, Rebecca, that you vote to cut it.
I will. Yeah.
We were asked. Robert McNamara, one of the brighter persons that we had, is unfortunately involved in the Vietnam War, but a very bright person, was asked several years after he left office, is how much could we cut the defense budget without impairing our security? He said 50%. And I agree with that. With what knowledge I have of the budgetary process and what's going on, it's like we could stop making tanks. We don't need more than 6,000 tanks.
Yeah.
So we could cut the military budget by 50%, and be better off. We'd have a better defense, because we know just from experience that when you throw money wantonly at a problem, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. You've got to reason it out and not just rely on a bunch of easy money.
Mm-hmm. Well, somebody asked. So
You
we've
got
talked
enough
to.
light in here?
I think so. Yeah. Thank you. Or do you want me to get it?
Yeah, the other one.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
So we've talked about who you want for president. Who would you predict will win the nomination?
Well, it's a tough one. I know that the Democratic Party is going to try to sabotage Bernie, and so I'm concerned about that. But I would predict I would predict and say that I think Bernie's going to win, and I hope he'll select Tulsi for vice president. But if he doesn't win, if he's denied, and what's his name, Joe Biden wins, I wouldn't vote for Joe Biden. I'd probably vote for the Green Party. And I feel very deeply about it. I voted last time for the Green Party because I knew Hillary Clinton was a flawed candidate.
Yeah.
I wonder, did I answer that question?
You did, yeah, thank you. And that's interesting. So you're not a vote. This probably goes without, I don't need to ask this, but you're not a vote blue no matter who.
Oh, God, no. Well, that goes back to the point I was making with you.
Yeah.
And that is, my party right or wrong. When my party is right, I support it. When my party is wrong, I oppose it with every ounce. So when you say that Joe Biden gets in, I would not vote for him for the very simple reason that it will be politics as usual. And that's why the people voted for Trump, because they were fed up with politics as usual. And so if we go back to that, we may get somebody, we'll get rid of Trump, I think, but we may wind up with somebody later on who is like Trump, but with a brain. That's dangerous.
Right. I think we're going to wrap it up now, folks.
Yeah, so we can go get Rebecca some food.
Thank you so much.
And Whitney, come in and sit. Here, I want you to meet my wife.
Hi, Whitney.
No, I'll hold you down.
No, that didn't feel right.
but I got to tell you, love of my life is Whitney. I wouldn't be able to do what I do if it weren't for her support. And she right now is working on a project to honor the women who were the suffragists who fought for the right to vote. And that's what she's doing now as part of a project.
There are going to be events all over the country because
cool.
2020 is the centennial of the 19th Amendment. And it's not that we've accomplished everything we need to accomplish in terms of access to voting, but the 19th Amendment was a significant step forward.
Yes, it was.
But is that going to be a book or?
No, people are doing all sorts of activities. They're having speakers, they're having film festivals, they're raising money to make sure school libraries have books about women's history.
That's cool.
Libraries are doing programs, and so actually, an organization down in Southern California has a float in the Rose Parade.
Oh, cool.
And we're also, our group, and I think others too, we're going to march in the 4th of July parade.
Oh, cool.
And hopefully in outfits that were the kind of outfits worn in the early 20th century.
Oh, neat. That'll be fun.
Votes for Women sashes.
Yeah. Cool. What's the name of the project?
Well, the group sponsoring a lot of these things is the National Women's History Alliance. And but there's various groups, the 2020 Centennial, and if you look up anything to do with, the centennial of the 19th Amendment, there are a lot of groups doing things.
Cool. Well, thank you both for doing the live.
Well, Rebecca, one of the things that I'm thrilled about is that as a young lady, you're running for office, and so we need more women in public office.
Thank you.
And I wish you well, and I wish your friends, telling your friends to work hard to get Rebecca elected.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good luck.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.